Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night and realized you weren't alone? Not just the feeling of being watched, but the certainty. The kind of certainty that makes your body go stiff and your heart pound so hard it feels like it's shaking the walls around you. What would you do if you opened your eyes and saw someone standing just outside your tent, in the pouring rain, staring at you? Because that's what happened to me. And it's the reason I never went camping in the Smoky Mountains again. It was June of 2014. I was 23 years old, fresh out of college, and all I wanted was a summer full of adventure. So when a few of my closest friends suggested we go camping in the Smoky Mountains, I didn't hesitate for a second. I'd grown up in Tennessee. The mountains were like a second home. I'd been hiking through those woods before, but never overnight, and definitely not in the kind of storm that would roll in that night. When we got to the spot we picked out, the rain had just started, a light drizzle. We thought it would pass. We laughed, joked about how this was going to be real camping. You know, the kind you tell stories about later when you're old. But the drizzle didn't pass. By the time we pitched the tent, the storm was in full swing. The ground turned soft and muddy. The air smelled of wet pine and earth, and every clap of thunder echoed through the valleys like the mountains themselves were growling at us. But we were determined. We told ourselves this would be fun, that it was part of the adventure. Looking back now, it's almost funny how naive we were, because the storm wasn't the danger. The real danger was something else. By the time night fell, we were exhausted. Our tent sagged under the weight of the water, our clothes clung to our skin, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. Inside the tent, it was damp and cramped, but at least we were out of the worst of the rain. We lit a lantern, passed around a bottle of whiskey, and tried to laugh off the situation. But laughter doesn't last long when you're stuck in the middle of a storm. Eventually, the jokes faded, the lantern was turned down, and one by one, my friends drifted off to sleep. The sound of the rain against the tent was almost hypnotic, a constant drumming that drowned out everything else. I lay awake for a while, listening. The rain, the occasional snap of a branch in the distance, the long groan of wind pushing through the trees, everything outside felt alive, restless. And I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm wasn't the only thing moving out there in the dark. I must have drifted off sometime after midnight, because the next thing I remember was waking up to a sound that didn't belong. Not thunder, not wind, not rain, footsteps. At first I thought I was dreaming, but no, the sound was too real. Slow, heavy, wet. Someone or something was walking in the mud outside our tent. The steps were steady, deliberate, circling. I whispered one of my friends' names, thinking maybe they'd gone outside to, I don't know, clear their head or take a piss. But there was no answer. The footsteps just kept moving, slow and heavy, dragging through the mud. My chest tightened, my breath caught in my throat, and then the steps stopped, directly behind me, on the other side of the tent wall. I didn't want to move, didn't want to breathe, but then the lightning came. A flash so bright it lit up the forest like daylight for a split second. And that's when I saw him. Through the thin wall of the tent, silhouetted against the light, was the figure of a man. Tall, broad-shouldered, standing perfectly still. He wasn't hunched, he wasn't walking, he wasn't doing anything but standing there in the pouring rain. Not a sound came from him, no breathing, no shifting of weight, nothing, just stillness. The rain poured off him in sheets, but he didn't flinch, he didn't move. And in that instant, my blood turned to ice. The lightning faded, and darkness swallowed him again. I squeezed my eyes shut, telling myself it wasn't real, that it was the storm playing tricks, that I was just imagining things. But then another flash came, and there he was again, still there, still staring. Every crack of lightning lit him up in the exact same place, as if time itself had stopped for him. My friends slept on, completely unaware, and I lay there, frozen, every muscle in my body screaming at me to move, to yell, to wake someone up, but I couldn't, because some part of me knew, if I moved, if I made a sound, he'd come closer. Then the storm reached its peak. A blinding flash of lightning split the sky, followed immediately by a crack of thunder that shook the ground beneath me. And when I looked again, he was gone. The clearing behind our tent was empty. No footsteps retreating into the forest, no sound of movement, nothing but the endless pounding of rain. I didn't sleep again that night. I just sat there, my eyes wide, staring at the thin walls of the tent, waiting for another flash to show me he was still there. But he never came back. When the sun finally rose, I felt like I had aged years in one night. My friends stirred awake, groggy and unaware, until I told them what happened. They laughed at first, called me paranoid, said I must have been dreaming. But I saw the way they glanced around the clearing, the way they packed up in silence, faster than I'd ever seen before. We didn't cook breakfast. We didn't even talk. We just left. And not one of us suggested going back. Even now, years later, I can still hear those footsteps in my head. I can still see that silhouette frozen in the rain, unmoving, unblinking. And the worst part, I never heard him leave. Whatever that thing was, it didn't walk away. It didn't retreat into the trees. It just vanished. So if you ever find yourself camping in the Smoky Mountains and the storm begins to rage outside your tent and you hear footsteps in the mud circling around you, don't whisper, don't move, and for God's sake, don't look. What would you do if you were camping alone in the forest and the sound of coyotes suddenly twisted into the agonized scream of a woman, echoing across the river under the moonlight? That's what happened to me in Pike National Forest back in 2009. And to this day, I still don't know what it was that screamed that night. I used to camp a lot in Colorado. Pike National Forest was one of my favorite places, remote, peaceful, and far from the noise of city life. That summer, in 2009, I drove out with my dog Milo, planning a weekend by the South Platte River. Just me, the forest, and the sound of rushing water. I thought it would be the kind of trip that clears your head, but what happened there didn't clear my head. It haunted it. I set up camp near the riverbank. The sound of the water was constant, calming, like white noise. Milo sniffed around the edge of the clearing, tail wagging, ears perked. I built a small fire, cooked some food, and leaned back to watch the stars. I remember thinking, this was exactly what I needed. But around midnight, the forest changed. At first, I thought I heard coyotes, high-pitched howls echoing through the trees. That wasn't unusual, this was the wild. But the sound didn't fade or move away, it grew closer, sharper. And then, it changed. The howls stretched. They twisted into something else, something almost human. It wasn't howling anymore, it was screaming. Milo bolted into the tent, tail between his legs, shaking so hard I could hear his collar rattling. I tried to coax him out, but he wouldn't budge. That dog had camped with me countless times before. He was fearless. But that night, he acted like the devil himself was waiting outside. Then it came again, a scream, long, raw, and agonized like a woman in unbearable pain. It echoed across the river, bouncing off the cliffs, impossible to locate. My blood turned to ice. Every hair on my body stood on end. I unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside, and what I saw was nothing. Just the river rushing under the moonlight. No figures, no animals, no movement at all. I sat frozen in that tent for hours, clutching a flashlight I was too afraid to turn on. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. Every snap of a branch made my heart race. Milo whimpered the whole night, refusing food, refusing to sleep. And outside, the forest was unnaturally still. No owls, no crickets, just silence and the sound of the river. When dawn finally came, I felt like I'd survived something I couldn't explain. The forest looked normal again. Birds chirped. Sunlight filtered through the trees. Milo was exhausted, but calmer. Part of me wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. But then I saw it, on the riverbank, just a few yards from camp. Fresh footprints, bare feet, leading straight into the water and vanishing. Later that morning, I ran into a park ranger driving down the trail. I told him about the screams, about the footprints. He just looked at me for a long moment before shaking his head. Then he said, "No one's been out here for days." His words hit me like a punch. If no one was out there, then what the hell had I heard? I packed up and left that day. I never camped alone in Pike National Forest again. I can still hear it, the scream tearing through the night, echoing across the water. It wasn't coyotes, it wasn't human, it was something else. And if you ever find yourself camping by a river in the middle of nowhere and you hear a woman screaming in the distance, don't go looking, just leave. Have you ever stumbled on something in the woods that felt wrong? I don't mean strange or out of place. I mean truly wrong, like the forest itself was trying to tell you that you didn't belong there. In 2016, while backpacking alone through Maine's wilderness, I found a campsite. A campsite that should not have existed. The strangest part, the people who had been there seemed to have just vanished. And by the end of that night, I wasn't even sure the campsite had been real. It was late August. Perfect weather for hiking, sunny during the day, crisp and cool at night. I started my trip around noon with a plan to stay out for about 3 days. My pack was heavy with food and gear, but the air smelled fresh. The trail stretched ahead like an open promise, and I felt good. The trail I was following wasn't exactly a tourist path. It was an old logging road, barely kept up, more roots and moss than dirt at some points. Every so often, I had to step over a collapsed branch or duck under a leaning pine. As the sun started to drop lower, I noticed how quiet it was. The usual chatter of birds had faded. Even the wind seemed to stop moving. The deeper I went, the more the silence pressed against me, until the only sounds were my boots crunching leaves and the steady creak of my backpack straps. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but when the forest goes that still, it doesn't feel natural. Around dusk, I saw it. At first, I thought I'd stumbled onto another group of hikers, an old campsite set just a few hundred feet off the trail. But when I stepped closer, my stomach dropped. The tents were collapsed. One was half covered in leaves, like it had been left there for weeks. A campfire pit sat in the middle, ashes still gray, with chunks of half-burned wood scattered around it. And there was food, bags of chips, protein bars, even a small cooler, all sitting out, untouched. It looked like whoever had been here had gotten up in the middle of dinner and never returned. No footprints, no sign of a struggle, just emptiness. I walked around slowly, almost afraid to touch anything. The sleeping bags were still inside the tents, a flashlight lying on its side in the dirt, its battery long dead, a pair of hiking boots tucked neatly near a tree. It was eerie, like the owners had planned to come back, like they were still around, watching me from the trees. I didn't linger. Something about that place made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I decided to set up my own camp about a mile further down the trail, just to put distance between me and that forgotten campsite. But even then, I couldn't shake the image of it. That night, I lay in my tent, trying to convince myself there was a rational explanation. Maybe the campers got lost. Maybe they had to leave in a hurry. But around 2 a.m., I woke up. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then I heard it clearly, faint voices, whispers, and then laughter. High-pitched, playful, like children were running circles around my tent, giggling, whispering things I couldn't quite make out. My chest tightened. I froze, listening. There were no children in these woods, not at this hour. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe too loudly. The voices went on for minutes, circling, overlapping, sometimes sounding so close I swore I'd see a shadow pressing against the nylon of my tent. Then, just as suddenly as they started, the woods went silent again. I stayed awake until dawn, clutching the knife I always kept in my pack. When the first light broke through the trees, I forced myself to pack up quickly. I wanted nothing more than to get out of those woods. But before leaving, I decided to check the abandoned campsite one last time. When I reached the clearing, my blood ran cold. It was gone. No tents, no cooler, no boots, no fire pit. Just an empty patch of forest covered in leaves and moss, like no one had ever camped there. To this day, I don't know what I saw. Was it a ghostly remnant of something that had once happened there? A trick of my mind? Or did I stumble into a place that was never meant to be found? All I know is this: I've never been back to those woods. And sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I still hear children laughing outside my window. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be hunted? Not by an animal, not by a bear or a wolf or anything that belongs in the woods. I'm talking about something else. something human, but twisted, wrong. In 2002, I went camping with my uncle in the woods of Michigan. What I saw that night still wakes me up in a cold sweat, because out there in the trees, someone was watching us. And I swear, he wasn't out there to camp. He was out there to stalk. It was the middle of October, cold, crisp air. My uncle had taken me out to a remote campsite near Lake Superior, the kind of place where the only light came from your fire, and the only sounds were the wind through the trees and the crackle of burning wood. I was 16, excited to spend a weekend learning to hunt with him. What I didn't know was that I would leave with a memory that would haunt me forever. It started like any other camping trip. My uncle was the outdoors type, an experienced hunter, someone who knew those woods like the back of his hand. I was just a teenager, tagging along for the adventure. We drove down dirt roads until the trees swallowed the world around us, until there was nothing but forest and silence. When we finally set up camp, the sun was low, bleeding orange light through the trees. My uncle gathered firewood while I pitched the tent. I didn't know it then, but this would be the last time those woods ever felt peaceful to me. By nightfall, the fire was going strong. My uncle told old hunting stories, the kind meant to spook me, but I could tell he didn't really believe in ghosts or monsters. To him, the woods only held animals, predictable, explainable. But around midnight, when the fire burned low and the crickets went quiet, we heard it. Snap. A twig breaking somewhere just beyond the tree line. My uncle paused mid-sentence, listening. Another crack, closer this time. He whispered, probably just a deer, but I could feel it in my gut. It wasn't a deer. I squinted into the darkness, trying to see what was out there. That's when I saw movement, something shifting between the trunks. At first I thought it was just the shadows, but then I saw it. A figure, crouched low, half hidden behind a tree. No lantern, no flashlight, no gear, just a person. Watching. I froze. My uncle hadn't seen him yet. I wanted to say something, but the words stuck in my throat. And then the fire popped, sending sparks into the air. For a split second, the flames lit up his face. He was grinning. My chest went tight. Whoever that was, he didn't belong there. My uncle noticed me staring and turned. When his eyes found the figure, I swear I saw something change in him. He wasn't the joking uncle anymore. He wasn't calm. His voice dropped, firm and sharp. "Stay by the fire." He stood, grabbed his rifle, and shouted into the woods. "Hey, who's out there?" The figure didn't move, didn't answer, just crouched lower, grinning wider. Then it happened. As my uncle raised the rifle, the figure bolted, not away from us at first, but around us. He darted through the trees fast, silent except for the crunch of leaves. My uncle swung the gun, tracking him, but the man was gone before he could even aim. The woods swallowed him like he had never been there. We sat by that fire all night, my uncle gripping the rifle tight, his eyes never leaving the tree line. Every snap of a twig, every gust of wind felt like it was him coming back. When the sun finally rose, the forest looked normal again. Birds sang, light spilled through the branches, and for a moment I wondered if I had imagined it all. But my uncle didn't laugh. He didn't say it was nothing. He packed up camp in silence. And before we left, he told me something I'll never forget. That wasn't a camper. That wasn't a hunter. That was someone waiting. It's been over 20 years since that night, and I still can't explain it. Who hides in the woods without light, without gear, crouching in the dark just to watch? Why didn't he answer when my uncle called out? Sometimes I think about how long he had been there, watching us set up camp, watching us eat, maybe even standing there while we slept. Was he waiting for us to put the fire out? Was he waiting for my uncle to lower his guard? I'll never know, but whenever I hear a twig snap in the woods now, I don't think of deer anymore. I think of him, the hunter in the trees. If you like these horror stories, please like and share this video, and subscribe to the channel for more true horror stories. And if you'd like to support the channel even more, consider joining our channel membership, and you'll be helping us keep the nightmares coming. Imagine this. It's the middle of the night. The rain is pouring down on your tent in the middle of the Oregon woods. You're completely alone, miles from the nearest road, with nothing but a thin sheet of fabric between you and the darkness outside. And then you hear it. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate, on the side of your tent. What would you do? Because in 2017, that happened to me, and I'll never forget it. That weekend, I drove deep into Oregon, following a winding dirt road until my car couldn't go any farther. I threw on my backpack and started hiking until I found the perfect spot, a little clearing beside a creek, surrounded by towering pines. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of wet earth and moss. Even before the rain started, everything already felt soaked. I pitched my tent, built a small fire to cook dinner, and settled in. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. And when the rain started drumming on the trees above, I remember thinking, this was exactly why I came out here. To feel small, to feel cut off, to feel alone. Sometime after midnight, I woke up. The storm hadn't let up. The rain hammered the nylon roof like 1,000 fingers. The creek roared beside me, and every gust of wind made the trees moan. At first, I thought that's what woke me, but then I heard something that froze me in place. 3 knocks. Tap, tap, tap. Not random, not rain, not the sound of a branch. It was too perfect, too intentional. I lay completely still, my body tense, my breath caught in my throat. For one wild second, I thought, maybe one of my buddies followed me here. Maybe someone's messing with me, but no one knew where I was. I hadn't told a soul. This trip was supposed to be mine, and mine alone. I told myself I imagined it, that it was just the storm playing tricks on me. But before that thought even finished in my head, it came again, this time louder. Thump, thump, thump. The whole side of the tent flexed inward with each hit. I swear my heart stopped. My ears rang with the silence that followed, and I realized I was holding my breath so hard my chest ached. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't the rain. Something or someone was knocking on my tent. My first instinct was to curl into my sleeping bag and pretend I hadn't heard anything. But the knocking had been so clear, so deliberate, that I knew I wouldn't sleep another second if I didn't check. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely find my flashlight. My fingers fumbled on the zipper, every tooth of it screeching louder than the storm itself. I held my breath, yanked the flap open, and aimed the beam out into the darkness. The rain shimmered in the light, bouncing off the leaves and dripping in steady rivulets. The trees swayed, shadows bending in unnatural shapes. But there was no one there, no footprints that I could see, no movement between the trees, just emptiness. I swept the light across the ground, across the trees, desperately searching for an explanation. I almost convinced myself I was losing my mind, and then the beam slid back across the side of my tent. That's when I saw it. Muddy handprints, smeared across the wet nylon, the fingers spread wide, streaking down the fabric. Not paw prints, not random splashes of mud, hands, human hands. Someone had been standing right there, inches from where I was lying while I slept. I backed into the tent, zipped it shut, and sat there in the dark, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. My chest felt like it was going to explode. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but where? Through a storm? Into pitch-black woods, miles from my car? That felt like suicide. So I sat there. The handprints glistened on the outside of the tent whenever the light caught them. My ears strained against the rain, desperate for any sound. And in the silence between gusts of wind, I could swear I heard it. Footsteps, not constant, not circling, just occasionally a soft crunch, like someone shifting their weight out in the dark. I don't know if I imagined it or if something really was out there, but I stayed frozen, wide awake for the rest of the night. When daylight finally came, I unzipped the flap, half expecting to see nothing, half hoping I'd gone insane. But the handprints were still there, faded from the rain but clear enough to see, and in the mud around my tent, footprints. Not boots, not hiking shoes, bare feet, human. They led off into the trees and disappeared into the forest. I didn't waste a second. I packed everything as fast as I could, shoving things into my bag without care, and bolted. I didn't even eat breakfast, I just left. To this day, I don't know who or what was outside my tent that night. A stranger wandering barefoot through the Oregon woods in the middle of a storm, someone playing a cruel trick, or something else entirely. All I know is this: if you're ever alone in the forest and you hear someone knock on your tent in the middle of the night, don't answer. Do you know what your own voice sounds like when you're not the one speaking? I didn't, until that night. It was past midnight in the Sierra Nevadas. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag when a breath touched the tent wall beside my ear and a whisper slid through the fabric. Don't yell. It sounded like me. Same pitch, same rhythm, same little crack I get when I'm scared. From the other tent, my friend Ryan hissed, "Did you hear that?" Before I could answer, the ground shivered with quick, heavy footsteps circling us. Then, silence. I stared at the nylon inches from my face and felt the shape of a mouth press against it from the outside. The trip was supposed to be easy. 4 of us, me, Ryan, Jess, and Miguel. 2 nights in the backcountry. We were in our early 20s, overconfident and underprepared for anything truly strange. We parked at a dusty trailhead, joked about bears, and took a picture by a wooden sign where someone had carved a single word into the post. Don't. We laughed it off. The air smelled like sun-baked sap. The sky was a clean, endless blue. It felt safe. Miles in, we found a faint spur branching off the main trail. It was narrow, crowded by manzanita, almost erased by time. None of our maps showed it. Miguel said, "Shortcut to a better view." The spur felt immediately cooler, somehow quieter, like we'd stepped into a pocket where the wind forgot to move. A small tin tag hung from a low branch, stamped with a number 4 that looked upside down. Jess said, "This is how horror stories start," and kept walking anyway. We set camp in a shallow bowl of trees. No birdsong, no insects. Even our voices felt heavy here. We cooked quietly. The sun dropped like a stone, and the hollow filled with a dim gray that didn't look like evening so much as an old photograph. Ryan said, "Anyone else feel like we're not alone?" I laughed because that was easier than agreeing. It began as a dry rustling, like pages turning in a big empty room. Pine needles, I told myself. Just pine needles. Then the sound gathered, threads pulling into a knot, and the knot spoke. Dozens of voices, no body to hold them. Some too deep, some too high, some stuttering and overlapping. They weren't words yet, just the shape of words without meaning, brushing the edge of our campsite and circling once, twice. Jess whispered, "Do you hear that?" The voices braided together and tried again. My name came out first. My name. I'd never heard it spoken wrong and right at the same time. "Who's out there?" I called. Everything stopped. The forest held its breath, then booted feet hit the ground hard and fast, sprinting away through dark trees. The sound tore into the distance and collapsed. We took turns staying awake, if staying awake means staring at a clockless dark and counting breaths. At 2 a.m., I heard it again. A whisper crept up to the tent wall and tried to learn how to be human. It failed, but it was getting better. Closer. By 4 a.m., something pressed one finger against the fabric, slow, deliberate, and dragged it along the curve of my shoulder. Sunlight finally broke the night. We spilled out of our tents, eyes raw, nerves fried, and saw the prints. Big, deep, lugged soles with a worn corner on the heel. They circled both tents in tight loops, doubled back, then cut through the middle like whoever made them had stepped between our heads while we slept. None of us owned boots that size, and there were no approach tracks. The first print just began, right beside Jess's tent. We packed fast, no breakfast, no jokes. Ryan said, "We go now." We stepped onto the spur trail and found it different. The turns were too sharp. The markers we remembered, the fallen log, the split rock, were missing. We argued about direction until the wind carried a single clear word through the trees: "Stay." It sounded like Jess this time. Jess went pale. I didn't say that. Miguel tracked our route on his GPS. The line looked normal until it didn't. We were walking in a circle, a perfect ring tightening on itself, even though the ground sloped steady in one direction. We started leaving marks on trees. We found each mark again, from the wrong side. The forest felt like a mouth, and we were on the tongue. We cut cross-country desperate. 10 minutes in, Jess pointed up. A single old leather boot hung from a high branch by its lace, spinning faintly. The tread matched the prints. Inside the boot, stuffed all the way to the toe, was a strip of dirty cloth torn from someone's shirt. On it, written in marker, a smeared word, "Don't." We tried to push on, but every path brought us downhill without moving us forward. Hours vanished, the light thinned. When we finally broke into a clearing, my stomach turned. It was our campsite, same fire ring, Same forgotten spoon half buried in dirt. The circle had tightened. We were back in the bowl. The bowl was back in us. Twilight collapsed like someone cut the rope holding it up. We barely had time to relight the fire. The voices returned immediately, faster now, like they'd been practicing while we were gone. They layered over one another. Me, Ryan, Jess, Miguel, our own voices, wrong in ways only we would notice. They were learning. They were proud of what they'd learned. I shouted, "Say this if you can. The pine is not a door." The forest tried. "The pine is not a door." Then perfect. My voice, my cadence. "The pine is not a door." The words came from behind me. I was facing the fire. Behind me was the trunk of a pine tree. The tents rippled. Finger shapes pressed into the nylon from all sides, slow and curious, like children at an aquarium touching glass. Miguel grabbed the hatchet. Jess sobbed, "Don't go out there." Ryan unzipped the tent. Outside, no one. Just boot prints appearing one by one in the dirt. No body casting them, stepping closer and closer to him. We broke. We ran. No plan, just away. The trail lit itself with moonlight we didn't remember there being. Boot prints hammered beside us, dozens, maybe hundreds, keeping pace, veering close, then vanishing. Every time I looked left, a whisper kissed my ear and said my name like a secret I didn't want anymore. We burst into a wide, rocky clearing. The whisper stopped, as if we'd crossed a line. The stars were so sharp they felt like they could cut. For a second, relief cracked through the fear. Then the echo started. Our voices from minutes ago, replaying, overlapping, compressing time until every word we'd said all day came back at once, shouted by the dark. We heard a single clean voice, mine, spoken right beside my head though no one stood there. "Don't yell." I realized why. When we yelled, the whispers learned faster. When we spoke, they got better. We were teaching them how to be us. I grabbed my friend's hands. "No more talking," I mouthed. We nodded and walked. Gray bled into the world. The trees thinned. The dirt turned to gravel. We reached the truck at dawn, shaking and whole. Only then did we see the ring of boot prints around the vehicle. Not one set. Many. All sizes. The smallest print was the size of Jess's palm. On the driver's window, a clear oval of fog, as if someone had leaned in and whispered to the glass. We never reported it. What would we say? The forest borrowed our voices and gave them back wrong. Weeks later, I woke in my apartment to a soft sound at my door like pages turning. I looked through the peephole. Nothing. In the morning, dusty prints, small, perfect, curved across my doormat. And on my phone's voice recorder, which I swear I didn't turn on, a single whisper waited for me, my voice, in my home. The pine is not a door. It sounded perfect now. Have you ever had someone warn you about danger, only to later discover that person shouldn't even exist? In 1998, when I was just a teenager, my family went camping in the remote forests of Vermont, and on that stormy night, we met the camper who never left. We had driven deep into the Green Mountains, far past the regular campgrounds, to a site the ranger said was rarely used anymore. The place felt heavy, like the woods themselves were watching us. My parents set up the tent while I wandered near the tree line, feeling the air thicken before the storm. By the time the fire was going, the storm broke loose. Rain hammered down, thunder rolled across the mountains, and lightning made the trees look like skeletons for just a split second at a time. Inside the tent, we huddled together. But then I saw something through the downpour, a flicker of light moving between the trees. At first, I thought it was another camper, but when the figure stepped closer, I froze. An old man in drenched clothing, holding an old-fashioned lantern, his face lined and pale. He stood just outside the circle of firelight, water dripping from his coat. Then, in a voice that cut through the storm, he said, "You folks shouldn't be here. Strange things roam these woods." My dad asked him what he meant, but the man didn't answer directly. He just shook his head slowly. "Not safe here, especially after dark." His eyes locked on mine. And in that moment, I swear his pupils looked clouded, almost lifeless. Before anyone could say another word, the lantern dimmed, and the old man vanished into the storm. We barely slept. Every gust of wind felt like footsteps. Every creak of the trees sounded like a voice. I kept staring at the walls of the tent, waiting for that lantern glow to reappear, but it never did. By morning, the storm had passed. The woods looked ordinary again, bathed in soft sunlight, birds chirping like nothing had happened. But none of us could shake the image of that man. So I decided to ask the ranger about him. The ranger's office was a small wooden cabin with maps pinned to the walls. When I described the man, the lantern, his warning, his appearance, the ranger froze mid-motion, his face drained of color. Finally, he whispered, "Are you sure you saw him?" He sat down, lowered his voice, and told me something that made my stomach turn. "No one's lived or camped in that area for at least 20 years, he said. Then he leaned closer. "Unless you're talking about old Walter. He went missing in the 70s. Used to carry a lantern, just like you described. But he never came out of those woods." My heart dropped. The man we saw, Walter, had been missing for nearly 3 decades. And yet, last night, he stood just feet from us in the rain, warning us to leave. The ranger's final words still haunt me. People say Walter never left those woods. Some nights when the storm is bad enough, he shows up again. We packed up immediately, leaving that cursed sight behind. Even now, years later, I can still hear the way his voice cut through the thunder. Not angry, not threatening, just a desperate warning. And I wonder, if we hadn't left when we did, what might have found us in those woods that night. So if you ever camp deep in Vermont and a storm rolls in, watch for the glow of a lantern in the rain. Because if you see it, you might just be looking at the camper who never left. Have you ever woken up in the dead of night to a sound so unnatural, so bone-rattling, that every instinct in your body screams at you to run? That's what happened to me one summer night in 2013, deep in a Utah desert canyon. I thought I was alone out there, but I wasn't. Something was watching me. And when it finally revealed itself, I realized I should have never camped in that canyon. I had been driving all day through southern Utah, chasing solitude. I loved the desert, its emptiness, its silence, its sense of ancient history. By sunset, I found myself in a remote canyon, miles away from any highway. It was the perfect place to set up camp. I pitched my tent near the canyon wall, the red rocks glowing orange as the last light of day disappeared. The air grew cold fast, and the silence pressed in on me. No traffic, no voices, not even the sound of crickets. Just silence. I remember thinking it was beautiful, but also unsettling, like the canyon was holding its breath. I crawled into my sleeping bag, listening to the wind sweep through the canyon. For a while, it was peaceful. Then, sometime past midnight, I woke to a sound. It was a growl, low, deep rumbling. At first, I thought maybe it was a coyote, but coyotes don't sound like that. This wasn't a bark or a yip. This was guttural, almost like it was coming from a massive chest. The sound echoed against the canyon walls, making it impossible to tell where it was coming from. Left, right, behind me, it was everywhere. Before I could convince myself it was nothing, the growl shifted. It rose. It became a howl, not like a wolf or a coyote. This howl was deeper, stranger, so powerful it rattled my chest. The canyon walls caught the sound and threw it back at me, amplifying it until it felt like the whole desert was screaming. My blood ran cold. My heart pounded so loud I thought whatever it was could hear it. I froze, clutching my flashlight. Slowly I unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside, and that's when I saw it. A figure, tall, impossibly tall, standing in the moonlight on the canyon floor. It was moving on all fours, but it wasn't shaped like any animal I'd ever seen. Its limbs were long, too long. Its back arched unnaturally, like it was struggling to stay on all fours. The moon cast its shadow across the sand, stretching it toward my tent. I couldn't breathe. With shaking hands, I aimed my flashlight at it. The beam cut through the darkness, and the figure was gone. Just like that. 1 second it was there, looming in the moonlight. The next, the canyon floor was empty. My heart slammed against my ribs. I swept the light frantically across the rocks, but there was nothing. Only silence. Only the desert. But I swear I could still hear it breathing. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in my tent all night, gripping that flashlight, listening. Every few minutes I swore I heard soft scraping sounds, like claws dragging across stone. Sometimes it felt like something was circling my tent. Sometimes I thought I saw movement just beyond the edge of my light. But nothing ever stepped close again. Not until dawn. When the sun finally rose, I stumbled out of the tent, desperate to convince myself it had all been a nightmare. But in the sand, just a few feet from where I slept, were prints. Huge prints. Not paw prints, not human footprints, something in between. Long, splayed fingers dug into the earth, with drag marks trailing behind them. I stared at them for what felt like forever, before packing my gear as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I reached the highway, and even now, years later, I still wonder, what the hell was out there with me that night? People talk about coyotes, mountain lions, even bears out in those deserts, but none of them sound like what I heard. None of them move like what I saw. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear that howl in my head, the way it echoed through the canyon, the way it made me feel like prey. And I know one thing for certain, whatever it was, it's still out there, waiting. Thanks for watching Sinister Horror Diaries, where the shadows speak and the stories never end. Stay safe, stay scared, stay sinister.